merely soliciting political help from a foreign government, in the words of Mike Pence that you opened with,
by the way,
that is enough.
Did you see Chris Christie yesterday?
No.
Oh, good Lord.
So Chris Christie yesterday, beforehand, George Stephanopoulos asked him, would this be quid pro quo?
How bad could this be?
How bad could this be? And Chris Christie said, well, you know, I think the Democrats may be overplaying it. It would only be serious if the president said something like, I need you to do me a favor. Whoops!
It didn't age well.
Whoops! I mean, and you know, Chris, a former prosecutor, knows that's the sort of language. This is not a close call. You actually see at some point which people are, who's so deeply in it for Donald Trump that they actually, there's nothing Trump will ever do that will make them worry about this country. I want to ask you really quickly, Benjamin, about last night. The whistleblower complaint comes out. Were you surprised not only by Ben Sasse's reaction, but by reaction from other Republicans on the Hill and their staff, quietly worried, saying this is worse than even the memo that they released earlier in the day?
Right. So before that happened, we released a piece on Lawfare that said, remember that this memo/transcript is only one piece of the puzzle. And the broader window that it opens up is undoubtedly much worse than the text of the memo itself, because this is only one interaction in what is actually a long pattern that takes place over the summer between the president, Giuliani, the Ukrainians, the State Department, right? There's a lot of different pieces of this puzzle. The whistleblower complaint outlines apparently a much broader array of activity, and so I'm not terribly surprised that if you find the transcript or the memo disturbing, when you see the whole pattern laid out, it's going to be really disturbing. Yeah, and again, this, as we were all reminded every 1.3 seconds on Twitter yesterday, what the White House released was not a transcript. Thank you for that reminder every 1.3 seconds. So that's the best the White House had to offer, and it was not good. Republicans, of course, in the morning were shocked that the White House would release that.
Well, it's all been in an incredible 24 hours, especially. Let's move on. The president then pivots to the prosecutor general, who was fired by the Ukrainian government, and then to Joe Biden. Trump saying, quote, the other thing, there's a lot of talk about Biden's son, that Biden stopped the prosecution, and a lot of people want to find out about that. So whatever you can do with the attorney general would be great. Biden went around bragging that he stopped the prosecution. So if you can look into it, it sounds horrible to me. Zelensky then tells Trump that he knows all about the situation and ensures he'll soon have his own hand-picked prosecutor in place, promising, quote, he or she will look into the situation, specifically to the company that you mentioned in this issue. The issue of the investigation of the case is actually the issue of making sure to restore the honesty. So we will take care of that, and we'll work on the investigation of the case. So, my God.
The money line in that in that section of the memo, Willie Geist, was where Donald Trump told the president of a foreign country who he was withholding defensive weapons from that he needed to coordinate not only with his personal lawyer on digging up dirt on Joe Biden, but that he needed to coordinate. It took my breath away.
It's incredible.
It's really shocking. It's shocking. You think after all of this time, we would all be incapable of being shocked. And yet, Donald Trump says, talk to my attorney general. Talk to Attorney General William Barr.
This released by the White House.
Talk to my attorney general about digging up dirt on a domestic political rival while I'm holding up defensive weapons that are actually probably the only thing that would stop Vladimir Putin from going all the way to Kiev if he chose to. That, you talk about, and by the way, that's bad. Would you like to know what is worse, Willie?
Please.
I think you already know what's worse. But this is just for the kids at home. It's a romper room thing. It's like I'm looking through a mirror. They want to know if I'm going to see them. And there's all this suspense building. You know what's worse? That William Barr gets this from the DNI, and what does he say? He doesn't say what every self-respecting lawyer that I've ever known my entire life would say, which is like, okay, this looks like the President of the United States is trying to put me in a conspiracy to work with a foreign power to smear one of your domestic political opponents. So I better recuse myself right now. In fact, I'm going to wash my hands like Pontius Pilate and run out of the building with my hair on fire. No, he doesn't do that. Instead, he kills the complaint and says, nothing to see here.
That's
really,
right.
That takes all of this. Like, Rudy Giuliani may remind us of a crazy uncle. When you get the Attorney General involved, and then the Attorney General looks like he's part of a conspiracy, and then he says there's nothing to see here, move along, suddenly this entire crisis is taken to a new level.
And it calls into question some of Attorney General Barr's testimony over the summer on the Russia matter, where he was asked time and again if the president had asked him to do anything inappropriate, and he said no. We have some of the details on this. Barr and Rudy Giuliani were mentioned 11 times in this phone call between President Trump and President Zelensky. In one instance, the Ukrainian president told Trump, quote, "One of my assistants spoke with Mr. Giuliani just recently, and we are hoping very much that Mr. Giuliani will be able to travel to Ukraine, and we will meet once he comes to Ukraine." The other mentions mostly by Trump telling his Ukrainian counterpart to expect a phone call. The first came after the president asked Zelensky to investigate CrowdStrike, that cybersecurity company that concluded Russia was behind the 2016 DNC hack. The president told Zelensky that Barr would, quote, "call you or your people to get to the bottom of it." The next mention came when Trump told Zelensky that Giuliani and Barr would call to discuss what Trump called, quote, "bad people involved with the firing of that Ukrainian prosecutor in 2016. Then, concerning Joe Biden and his son Hunter, Trump told Zelensky, quote, "whatever you can do with the Attorney General would be great." Again there, Jonathan Lemire, talking about a political opponent bringing in the Attorney General of the United States on that question with a foreign leader.
It's an extraordinary thing to read, and for the White House to decide that this would be something that would help them to put out in public. I mean, it's one thing to ask your personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, and that there are questions raised there about the appropriateness of his dealing with a foreign government. He has said that the State Department was helping coordinate his travel and his contacts with the Ukrainian officials. The State Department has largely denied that. We have, of course, the Attorney General of the United States being involved with an investigation overseas in a foreign country, which goes to not just another norm, another rule, another guardrail this president has shattered, but to do so that raises all kinds of questions about the legality, and then to have Barr to not recuse himself from this matter going forward is extraordinary. And it goes to show you the lengths that the president will go to find sort of damaging information about Joe Biden. Even yesterday, as this scandal was swirling, after the memo was released, you know, I was with the part of the press pool that was traveled with the president all day as he had meetings throughout the United Nations, including one with President Zelensky of Ukraine, and we pushed him on this, and he then, at that point, still suggested that he felt like there was corruption that Zelensky could root out, that he still should get to the bottom of the Biden matter, that it was not something he wanted to let go.
Jonathan, we watched the press conference. You were there yesterday at the UN with the president. To say he was all over the place, I think, would be generous, not answering the questions that were put to him. They thought, I think, putting out the memo was going to be helpful in some way, that it would clarify things and maybe even clear the President of the United States. Obviously, it's done the opposite of that. Is he, when you watched him up there yesterday, just watching on TV, was he tired, rattled, some combination of those?
Yeah, tracking his mood in the last 24 hours and his demeanor, watching him up close and personal, but also talking to people around him has been sort of really interesting. For a long time now, people around the president have welcomed the fight of impeachment. They have said this will be a political winner for him. But Trump himself has been a little leery, though he's bought into that political calculation. Personally, this is not something he wanted. He is someone who knows that if he is impeached, even if he were to win re-election, this would be the first line of his political obituary. He knows that the pressure over the next year plus will be immense. And this is all that people will talk about, and there's no attempt to sort of enact any sort of agenda. And it'll be hard for him to do what he's so good at, usually changing the subject. He seemed defiant the other night, but yesterday, as the day went on, he had some interactions with smaller meetings with leaders, and he was pretty fiery, and he had interactions with the press, calling us corrupt and fakers at certain times, and seemed pretty defensive. But by the time we got to that news conference, and I talked to people around him later, they said the president was sort of tired, he was worn out, that yes, he was angry, but usually we see Donald Trump angry at very loud volume. Yesterday was more of a sort of a seething, he was